You've been listening to the podcast, The New Author, Uncle Michon, I'm Not Your Black, from Louisville, Kentucky. This conversation, the family. You're my family.
If you can tell me a little bit about yourself and your show, your podcast, and then we'll go through the question.
My name is Rick Howland. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. I do a couple of radio shows. I've been a co-host on a radio program here Monday through Friday in Louisville, 5 days a week, 10:30 to 11:30. And it's called the Values Coalition USA. It's on 1240 WLV. And they do another program on Sunday nights for 1 hour called the Black Heart Conservative. It's on at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on 970 WGTK here in Louisville. To give some information that you kind of got to be old to have the perspective that I have on Cassius Marcellus Clay.
How did you come to find out this information? What was your resources?
Okay, I was born in 1947. I'm 76 years old. And I grew up in Louisville. We got a TV in the 1950s, and one of the TV stations was WAVE, Channel 3. They had a boxing program on for amateurs. And there'd be little kids on their boxing. There'd be middle schoolers and high schoolers on their boxing, AAU and Golden Gloves. And suddenly one day I remember I was watching it because that was one of the few places where African Americans were on TV, where literally there were African Americans there. You knew we existed. And these little kids would be fighting. And one day this kid was introduced, and he was introduced as Cassius Marcellus Clay. And my mother, who was born in 1913, heard it, and she said, "Oh, he's named after," who later became Muhammad Ali. And Cassius Marcellus Clay was born in 1809. He was a member of the Clay family, and Cassius Marcellus Clay was born in 1809. He was a member of the Clay family. Henry Clay was a leader of the Senate for many years in the early 1840s. They were a very wealthy family, and at one point they owned more slaves than any other family in the state of Kentucky. Out of that family, you had this young man, Cassius Marcellus Clay, who was born and acted like an abolitionist from his earliest times. He published newspapers. I think he went to Harvard or Yale, graduated, and worked his entire life to try to end slavery. He was associated at different times in his life with Frederick Douglass. He was a hero in the Mexican-American War. What his motivations are, I don't think I've run across anything that talks about where he was quoted to give his personal reasons why he would be one way and most of his family would be the other. And then after slavery ended, he struggled to help the freed slaves and their children get an education. I have as much respect for him as I have for Muhammad Ali. I have as much respect for him as I have for Muhammad Ali. And Ali was contemporary with me. He was like, I think he's 6 years older than me. He was around in the neighborhood. We used to see him. He was famous once he got on the March Champions because he was on TV probably twice a month at least, boxing somebody. And they'd have to bring competition from other cities to fight him because after a while nobody wanted to fight him locally. And they'd have to bring competition from other cities to fight him because after a while nobody wanted to fight him locally because he was so fast. That was his main thing. He was so fast you couldn't hit him unless he stood still and let you hit him. He was something to behold before before they stopped him from fighting over the Vietnam War. But Cassius Marcellus Clay was a man that was favored, that was respected and spoken of respectfully by my mother and father's generation. Most black people in Kentucky knew who he was. Ali movies. Did you see the one where Ali played himself? That was the one done in the 70s. There was a scene in Ali where his father is yelling at him and mad at him because he changed his name. And he said, I gave you a name. I gave you a good name. He said, I gave you a name that meant something. Cassius Marcellus Clay. The man lived his entire life trying to set black people free. He lived to be 92 years old, and Muhammad Ali, I don't think, knew very much about Cassius Marcellus Clay, if anything. But they seem to be two men who are driven by a purpose, and both of them seem to be driven by a purpose to benefit their people. And for some reason, the original Cassius Marcellus Clay evidently saw our people as his people.
We know Muhammad Ali. He got involved with the Nation of Islam.
Right.
And now over here we have his dad and the legacy of Cassius Clay, and so there was a conflict there.
I know most of us think of that he was Muslim, and we have a way of cubby holding people. But Muhammad Ali transcended. He became a world citizen. I don't think that there was much different about him and his struggle to improve the human condition than there was about the original Cassius Clay. I think probably in his youth he was so convinced about not wanting to have the slave name that he gave up a name that actually was very important to his people. I don't think that there was much different about him and his struggle to improve the human condition than there was about the original Cassius Clay. I think probably in his youth he was so convinced about not wanting to have the slave name that he gave up a name that actually was very important to his people. Are you familiar with Berea College in Kentucky?
No.
Okay, Berea College is near Ashland, Kentucky. It was founded by a guy named John G. Fee before the Civil War ended. But he was run out of the state of Kentucky and had to run to Ohio and hide. But they came back after the Civil War was over and they reestablished the school. The land on which this school, where this man was interested in educating, pre-Civil War, educating slaves and their children, got himself in trouble because it was illegal. When he came back, he was still interested in educating former slaves and their children. And Cassius Marcellus Clay, being a wealthy man, gave them land on which to build the college. And Berea College is still in existence to this day. Now, I'm not sure if they're still on the same plot of land, but he helped to get them started. When he came back, he was still interested in educating former slaves and their children. And Cassius Marcellus Clay, being a wealthy man, gave them land on which to build the college. And Berea College is still in existence to this day. Now, I'm not sure if they're still on the same plot of land, but he helped to get them started. To my mind, if somebody gives you the land upon which to found a university, they helped you found a university. And Berea College, that would really be something for nationwide, really, for African Americans to find out about, because Berea College has always been at the forefront of racial reconciliation. I've got a good friend, a young lady. She's an attorney here, and I think she ran for judge in the last election. Her name is Nicole Compton. She was a student at Berea College in recent years, so it's still there. And this guy literally, he struggled for the first 35 or 40 years of his adult life to end slavery. During the Lincoln administration, he was named as an ambassador to the court at St. Petersburg in Russia. And he was a distinguished guy, and he wasn't just a fighter. He was not, and I say fighter because he was known for dueling. Because so many people that hated his opinion about slavery would challenge him. He would literally go duel with them and shoot them. He didn't challenge people in duels. People challenged him in duels. And they actually attacked him. On 2 occasions, there were hit squads where Cassius Clay was attacked. All he had on him was a bowie knife, and he won the fight.
Wow.
Okay, and he didn't kill him. He just cut him up pretty bad. But think about it. He was big enough, strong enough, and fast enough to be able to whip 4 men hand to hand. And then a few years later, he was attacked by 5 brothers. And if you've got brothers that grow up together, they know how to work together. They don't even have to. They don't even have to tell each other what they're doing. You know what your brother's doing. And they attacked him. They shot him in the back, and he had a bullet in his back. He went down. They took his bowie knife off of him. He recuperated his strength laying there. And I think they were probably trying to figure out what to do with him. But he got up and started fighting them. He took his bowie knife away from him, and he cut them up, and he killed one of them. And there were people. One of the stories my mother told me about him. The day that you remember I was talking about, he came on and Ali was introduced as Cassius Marcellus Clay. He was a little boy. He was about 12 years old.
He was introduced to actual Cassius Clay.
Yeah, she told me about a fight he had in the state Senate or the state House of Representatives here in Kentucky, where a guy attacked him because he was against slavery. And they actually had a fist fight, and he almost beat the man to death on the floor. He was always under pressure. His life was at stake, simply because he believed that we needed to be free. And it's hard for me to see where he and Muhammad Ali would have had much to disagree about if they had been contemporaries. Ali became a Muslim, but if you actually listen to a lot of stuff Ali said, a lot of what he said was interspersed with Baptist doctrine that he had grown up hearing. And I'm not besmirching his Muslim faith, don't get me wrong, but there was a sweetness about him after the court situation was over. There was a decency and a kindness that had always been there about Ali that somehow became more apparent as he grew older and older, to the point that when he died, even his enemies weren't his enemies anymore. A lot of African Americans, a lot of black folks refer to their family names as being their slave name. But he happened to have a slave name that actually meant something. In the words of his dad, he gave him a name that was a good name. He gave him a name of a man that did what he could to set us free, to the point that my mother, who was born after he was dead, knew enough about his life to tell her little boy at her knee about this guy, Cassius Marcellus Clay. Black folks whose ancestry goes back in the state of Kentucky 4 or 5 generations, we were raised as a bumper crop. Once the Atlantic slave trade ended, which was bringing slaves from Africa into America. Once that ended, in order to maintain the slaves that they used for work in the fields, they began to raise us like cattle. And I imagine the Clay family would have been involved in that because they were the largest slaveholding family in the state of Kentucky. So I'm pretty sure they were raising us. We were a crop. We were a cash crop. Henry Clay, he's considered to be one of the greatest senators that was ever in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate. He's from Kentucky. Cassius Henry Clay, and he was anti-slavery, even though he was a member of the same family.
Wait a minute. So Henry Clay is the dad, you said?
No, his cousin. They were cousins.
But the whole thing is that the articles I was reading, they were saying there's a contradiction here with Cassius Clay, that he was also a slave owner.
Yeah, and when he inherited slaves, he set them free. There was no contradiction. He had a newspaper at one point in Lexington, Kentucky, and some slave holders came and attacked his newspaper office, and he was there, but they left him alone. They took his equipment, took his printing presses and everything, just took them and sold them somewhere. So he was always in some kind of turmoil, and he was always fighting. So he was always in some kind of turmoil, and he was always fighting to end slavery.
Okay, so he had a newspaper. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that. What is
that?
Yeah,
he started a newspaper in Lexington, Kentucky. It probably would have been in 1820s, 1830s, something like that. And people that were pro-slavery came, and a mob came and attacked his business and took his equipment.
So he, on top of all these other things, freeing the slaves and all that he did, he actually had his paper, but also did you say he also got involved with politics?
Yeah, he became an ambassador to the court of St. Petersburg in Russia under Abraham Lincoln appointed him when he became president. The ambassador to St. Petersburg.
Okay.
And it seemed like the driving force for everything that he accomplished and everything that he did. It grew from his desire to fight slavery.
So what was his relationship with Abraham Lincoln?
I don't know. There's not much other than Abraham Lincoln appointed him. It doesn't go too deeply. It didn't seem like they were. They may have been friends. They may have known each other, but evidently that wasn't a big deal. Other than it got him appointed to be ambassador to the court of St. Petersburg in Russia.
That was a very crucial role.
Yeah. Because St. Petersburg, I think, at that time was the capital of Russia, pre-Soviet Union. So he was where the Tsar of Russia was.
And he also, as you said, he worked with Frederick Douglass.
Yeah. They were contemporaries, and they were both fighting against slavery.
But basically, this is a whole scenario that's been barely ever mentioned in the media or anywhere, right?
Yeah, there's something. It appears that the South seemed to be more able to get their point of view about slavery and about the South and how the South was and the Civil War. It seemed like to me everything I ever read about the Civil War was written by Southerners. And so Southerners weren't writing about white people that weren't against slavery very much. So they wouldn't write anything about Cassius Marcellus Clay because a Southerner who wanted the South to rise again wouldn't see him as being a hero. so he wouldn't even write anything about it. Probably most of what we know about him came from African Americans who knew what he was doing to get us set free.
Shit. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's an amazing story. That's definitely a starter at this little talk, but maybe later on we can bring you on another podcast.
Not a problem. I will.
You've been listening to the podcast, The New Author, Uncle Michon, I'm Not Your Black, from Louisville, Kentucky. This conversation, the family. You're my family.